Okay, we can start. So good day, everyone, and I hope you can see my screen and also hear me properly. Today is a sunny day in Amsterdam, so I wish also you had a nice day in the opening of the SOFA Summit and you're enjoying it. Today we're going to talk about data mesh, and data mesh is, let's say, the new buzzword in the data architecture. And today I will try to explain a little bit the theory, but also keep a balance between theory and a practical side of it, because we at ABN AMRO has been implementing data mesh for quite some time now. So we have some lesson learned that I would like to share with the rest of you. This is the how the agenda will look like. So we will start with the data architecture history. Just checking if everything is okay. Yeah. Okay, we'll start with the architecture history, and then we will talk why data mesh, and after that we will go for best practices, and later we'll go for some of the challenges as well that you may face in your organization as well. So in order to understand the history, we need to look into sort of a timeline. And before the timeline, we need to understand a very important concepts, the online transaction processing and the online analytical processing. So OLTP systems are those kind of systems that they are customer facing, they are mission critical, and they used to run your business. And so, for example, your CRM application, your transactional system, your core banking system, your SDD if you're in telecommunication, and so on and so forth. And these kind of systems give you the support your current business, your current needs. They have certain characteristics that they need to be inside the application in order to perform. But this one kind of reflects the reality. And in order to join it with the future and the past, we needed to have an online analytical processing systems. And these are sort of systems that we look backwards and look in the future, try to do your data warehousing on it or data lake or whatever architecture you are trying to implement in your organization. Also look in the past, learn from it, do some predictions and everything around analytics. And these two exist actually in any organization hand in hand in order to really and truly become a data-driven organization. So you need to empower your company with the past and the future and the current, and this is really the combination between the two is really how it works. And if you debug a little bit or look deeper in the characteristics of the OLTP and OLAP, so the OLTP are, of course, client-facing applications. Let me get my pointer quickly. So client-facing application should be high available, function responsive. And the other side, you're looking into reports, predictions, dashboards, metrics, machine learning models, etc. And the layer between these two is known as an ETL, extract, transform, and load. This kind of in middle is always a challenging piece of architecture because it is so often fragile and it is run by IT and not by business. And that is what data mesh is trying to challenge. And I'm going to explain exactly how this will happen. But this is sort of a preparation for the upcoming slide, where we are going to talk about the history of architectures. So around the 60s, the data warehousing concept were there. So this is like a classic data warehouse where you collect all your information from the online transaction processing system and put it in a one single big data warehouse where you can run your analytics, your reporting, etc. And after that, because of that, let's say, evolving in the data types and evolving in the speed of data and data types and stuff like that, then the data warehouse won't be able to cope with these changes and the immediate needs of analytics in your organization. And that's why the data lake concept came, where in the data lake, you put the data in a lake and then later figure out how to consume it. However, in the warehousing, it was like the data has to fit the schema that you built, and then reporting will happen. And between these two architecture, the common theme is you always have, let's say, a data domain on the right or on the left, a producer, a consumer, and there's a central data store in the middle. However, also around 2015, when really cloud took off and the public cloud vendors like Azure and AWS and Google and GCP, they actually challenged this a bit, because before that, Hadoop was, let's say, mainly dominant in the area of the lakes and still an on-prem implementation. But when cloud computing came, it seems that it will be much easier to implement lake and warehousing architecture because it's a speed of a light. You can have any service and you can run your infra in no time. But actually, what would happen, if you look into reality, it is actually still the same centralized data store in the middle, but it just spins faster and maybe less costly than Hadoop implementation. But still, that middle layer exists. And this is what really data mesh is trying to challenge. It tries to bring the analytical world and the operational worlds together in the domain itself. So no central team, IT team in the middle that tries to facilitate a data journey between a provider and a consumer. And of course, in the upcoming slide, we will deep dive, but this is, let's say, the major difference between before mesh and after mesh. And for completeness, also, there are new concept that tries to bring the business warehouse and lake, like the lake house, which is an open data management architecture supported by many tools. So we'll also get into that when I come to, let's say, my recommendations for architecture. In the next slide, we will deep dive in the mesh itself. So data mesh, you can see it as a dense network of nodes containing data. Unlike that centralized monolithic, let's say, architecture, everything and the data is decentralized. So in a nutshell, you can say if you have your finance department, your risk departments, your HR department, each of those departments considered as a node. And in that node, they contain the analytical and definitely the operational systems, the online OLTP and OLAP together in one node. And that is a fundamental change. And then, so the enterprises are leveraging the domain-oriented and in a self-service design. I will explain that. So if you look into it, let's say from a picture point of view, this is like before mesh. There's that central team in the middle, and every piece of or every domain in the organization is evolving around it. And the lake and the mesh is actually tries to challenge that by pushing the domain to own the analytics as well, together with the operational side. And that gives a little bit of flexibility because you, for the first time ever, you can have an online transaction processing and analytical processing hand in hand in one domain. Aims for really democratizing data, because if you know what you are dealing with in a domain level knowledge, it should be easier for you to share the data and then do proper quality for it and also exchange it with other domain much faster. And instead of the classical way where you give your requirement to an IT team, and the IT team need to understand the business, and so often they can't. And that is really the main challenge in the current architectures, that it is evolving about that central team, and that central team doesn't understand the business. And that will always be like a back and forth communication in order to understand. But what Mesh is trying to challenge is, okay, push that also towards the domain, because they are the expert. And of course, there's another challenge for the IT team, which we are going to see in the branch, one of the principles, that they need to be more of an enabler rather than the doers of the data itself. And of course, it's more decentralized, at least the theory promotes for that, and then has a very four solid principles, which we are going to tackle in a second. In the next slide, I will just explain the principles. So we have four principles: data domain ownership, data as a product, self-service data platform, and federated governance. And combining these four, you should truly have a data mesh architecture. I'm going to explain and focus principle by principle the theory, but also I'm going to show you the practical side of it as well. So this is us, let's say, in our data journey. I've chosen this theme because indeed it's a journey and there is no really real solid implementation exists. We all try to do it because also it's just 2018 and also 19 kind of architecture, so it's not mature as warehousing or lake. So I'm going to use the PPT framework in order, whenever I want to explain a practical side from my experience, from our experience at ABN AMRO. And PPT framework is simply whenever you want to apply a change, be it changing your architecture, in your organization, reorganization, whatever, there's always three sides. So you need to think from the people perspective, process perspective, and technology. And it's a very common used common framework that's being used. And then nowadays it's even evolves to include data in it, because without data you cannot fulfill anything. So I will adapt the BBTD framework in every practical advice that I'm trying to give you, as you're going to see in the next slide. So let's start with the first and the most important foundational principle in mesh, which is the data domain ownership. What does this really mean? As I explained before, the idea here is that the data domain itself owns, the data, not just the transactional side of it, but also the analytical side of it. So, finance, they have their own systems in order to run their business, but then another analytical systems coexist in their domain. So you can see, let's say, the same data analyst who understands the operational side also can help with his knowledge or her knowledge in the analytical side, because simply they know what you're talking about. And once you have that kind of ownership, you come also, and your mindset evolves around, so I own it rather than, dump it to an IT team and, sit and relax. And that is one of the main fundamental changes. It's also mentality change. What data mesh is challenging. So I own it, it's my data, and I am responsible for it. That's a big change in the mindset. And in the upcoming principle, we'll talk in detail about the idea of having your data as a product. So inspiration for this, it came from the domain-driven distributed software architecture, or known as microservices, because before microservices, we used to have the common challenge in the software architecture, but microservices came and also challenged that. So you can have your own domain oriented design API in order to fulfill business needs. So similarly, the data mesh inspiration by Jamak came from that kind of. Jamak Dijani is the founder of the term and also the main active person in that area. So she got the inspiration from that kind of software architecture. And if you manage to achieve the domain ownership, I think then you will be really in a good position to adapt mesh architecture. Now, I'm bringing again the model that I spoke about, the process, technology, and people, the PPT model, in order to give you now a little bit of tips and tricks of how you can achieve that also practically. So, for example, the people side. So, eventually we are people who are going to execute a change or change an architecture. So we need to create that kind of data domain team in every domain, meaning that the domain contains a mix between business and IT people. Together, they should be able to understand end-to-end their data product and their data needs and also data requirements. And that means that you have to invest in your domain to enrich them or supplement them, not just with business, but business with IT as well. And together, they are responsible for the data distribution, because it's so often you can run your analytics in your own domain. So finance, they want to do a sales, or maybe the sales department wants to do a sales per quarter report. But that data also need to be used in another domain. Let's say the marketing team wants to get it. So there you will see that there's definitely a need for exchanging data. And if you exchange the data between the domains, it's much easier to analyze and challenge the requirement, because we in the originating domain understand what data is about. The second change is in the data itself. So there's a concept of the domain bounded context that you need to take care of. So the data that's being generated in that domain need to be encapsulated in a bounded context. And then nothing, so if you want to exchange the data outside of the bounded context, different rules applies than what you have in your own bounded context. And of course, the processes, to make a change, you need the processes. You need to create the processes that facilitate that kind of mindset. So create the rules within your organization that safeguards the organization, the architecture. And the last piece is technology. Always look into the new technologies that have that kind of mindset of OLTP and OLAP coexist together. And my tip for you today is to search more about the CQRS pattern. I have a small slide to explain what is it, because that's a really fundamental piece that you may use in your evaluation of tools. So CQRS is a software architecture design that allows for the reads and write of your application to happen in the same context. So what you see here is, if this is your CRM system, so there's an interface, an agent is typing like some records for a customer, it gets saved here. That's your online transaction processing. And right away, the data is being pushed automatically to another layer, which is more organized around the analytics and the usage of the data. And these kind of tools are rare in the market, but always keep that kind of software architecture, because that one is really hitting the point of data mesh architecture. The second principle is data as a product. And data as a product is a very nice principle, because it talks about, let's say, the responsibility and the mindset of the teams. So in my domain, have the data for me is not just like, a piece of software, a piece of data that you distribute. It's actually a product. It's my own product. And then no one will be interested in buying my product if I don't have the mindset of I have the best product ever. So I want to make it more pretty. I want to make it, accessible to people. I want to make it explainable. All these kind of concept falls under data as a product concept. So you have responsibility. I have a usable, viable, feasible product. That kind of mentality is crucial here. I need to have the first-class product. We need to create like a culture where there's a competition of the good data sets between the domains, because it is actually sort of you try to promote your data because you are so proud of it as well. And then definitely if you own it, then you fix it. So whenever there's a problem like a data quality issue, a data gap, then a clear ownership needs to be known, and then we know exactly to whom we shall address that. And of course, by doing that, you avoid the concept of dark data, because dark data as a concept means that information assets that organization collect, but we don't know exactly from where it is coming and who's owner of it. And that exists in many, if not most of the organizations, because of legacy softwares, because of team structures, whatever. So if you push that kind of dark side towards the domain, it will become super clear who owns what, and then what are the responsibilities. Back to our model in order to give some practical advices. From a technology point of view, nothing changed from previous advice. Try to find the tools that supports both operational and analytical. However, in the process side, you have a big challenge here to do as an organization, because you need to incentivize the teams, the domain teams that we spoke about, to really own the data. And one of the cool examples is maybe you can match the budget of the team by the happiness of the data consumers. It sounds a little bit silly, but actually this is the mindset that we need to have. I have the best product ever. I want everyone to buy it. Like I have a mouse that I'm putting in Amazon or Pol.com or any other portal. You want it to be sold, right? You're just putting it for fun and people to look at it and not. So that kind of mentality needs also the organization to create the processes, and you can have a lot of creative solutions around that. And of course, never compromise the metadata, because now when we come to the challenge of the mesh, you will see that you may run into a lot of data duplication by having the domain. Each domain has its own data, etc. So metadata is your key fundamental piece that you don't want to never to compromise in order to have mesh working properly. And then you should really have a clear data governance rules within your organization in order to scale. And this is a reference model from ABN AMRO that I will just explain how we look into it. So we have a provider in one side, we have consumer. We have created these rules as part of the organization itself. So you have a function when we hire someone called data owner, data steward, data application owner. And that makes it easier because these people, it's not like a title that you get like supplement to your software engineer or architect. It is actually a dedicated rule in organization, and that has certain obligations for you. And this is how you can ensure that these people understand the concept of data product and then maintain it. So what we have here, a data owner is more from the provider side. So they own the data. He has his counterparty is as an application owner. So this is the technical person who understands the data and the systems. And then on the other side of the consumption, you have the data users, people who has data needs. Then you have an application owner for the data needs as well, because so often the analytics need to run an application. And this is our idea of how ownership rules are being defined in an organization, and it has been really successful for us. The third concept that we're talking about is self-service data platform. So now imagine that you have all the domains and everything is scattered and decentralized. How would this happen? Because currently you have a centralized team, and then you can invest in it, in the infrastructure of it, in an easy way, right? So I have database cluster, Hadoop cluster, an ETL server, etc., in the classic way. But now we want to challenge that and push it away towards a domain. So that makes a big challenge in how you manage your data platform, also including the infra side. And that principle tries to give some guidance on how to tackle that. So first of all, the role of IT here is really crucial. They are not anymore the man in the middle, but they are actually the enablers for the domains to run the analytics. So they need to have sort of a data platform that is scalable, also can be replicated in every domain, and then be used easily between the domains. And then it needs to be, the IT here needs to be truly enablers. So, so they should be domain agnostic, so that they don't care about the domain that's consuming the data, but it's more of how can I enable them to run a simple ETL job, a simple report in a PI tool, or maybe an advanced analytics model, their own. So the challenge here is to create that kind of an easy to use infrastructure and also pipelines that is scalable and usable as well. And that creates a new level of abstraction, actually. So that's really, really, really a big change in the fundamentals of infra. And then, of course, that means that you need to have a new category of tools that support such a thing, that they can be deployed multiple, but maybe managed centrally. And in my advice for the self-service infra, I would really, if you are already as an organization, have a cloud strategy. So infra as code is your key point here, because infra as code makes you really able to spin certain services quite easily and then encapsulate them in a wrapper that can help the domains to run quickly. And from maybe an AMRO experience, we have invented the concept called domain data store. So it is nothing but a set of services from, in our case, Azure. So you have a SQL database, you have Synapse Analytics, you have Data Factory, Databricks, and a bunch of other services encapsulated together. And each domain who wants to have a data platform, they just click of a button and then the code executes, and then you have your own ready-made infra to be used right away at your domain. And that is really, really important. And of course, you need to create the processes that facilitate that. And that's also not easy. So you have to, I didn't elaborate much here because it's actually from organization to another, but the key message is try to make the IT people as enablers rather than doers. And of course, the data needs to be still, having said that you have your own self-service infrastructure, data ownership is still with you, and also the bounded context still applies. And of course, in the people side, you need to change the mentality of the IT and also your data engineer that I am going to do it to more of how can I enable others to do it. The fourth principle is federated governance. As you may have guessed now, if you have all these kind of nodes and completely decentralized, how would you achieve governance? And this principle is trying to give guidance around how you will do the governance. So you definitely want to have a layer on top of all the domains that can ensure certain characteristics from your data governance perspective. So for example, certain regulations, certain standardization, certain automation, interoperability standards. And so for example, you can say each mesh is able to produce and consume data in a form of a flat file or Parquet or any other type. And you cannot just keep it that every domain can innovate as much as they can. You have to balance that act between being, let's say, decentralized and also keeping the governance layer. And applying these kind of concepts will help you to have that governance layer intact and maintained. And actually, all the domains are respecting by design these governance. Because as if you want to link it to the previous pillar, the IT still enablers, so they have the threads to control that, but they are not the people who are doing it. So you can say when you provide a domain data store architecture, you can limit the data types that are being used in your data ingestion by utilizing some metadata by the ingestion framework that you create as a standard, and then that will ensure the domains comply with it by design. So that's really important. And in the federated governance, I want to also give some advices. So use the technologies that can be offered and managed centrally still, but by IT team or whatever entity in your organization, but used decentrally. And that's a little bit of a practical experience, because the theory, if you want to really apply the theory and give that little bit of flexibility in each domain, you will really struggle with a lot of things, like the amount of tools, the amount of technologies. I can use here a tool, but you can use something else here. So if you still, from a license perspective, from a cost perspective, if you found a tool that can be offered as a central capability, but then used decentrally, that will be really important in your tool selection. And I see a lot of tools in the market are going to the direction, like, for example, Microsoft Purview, Select Star, or even Glue at AWS, etc., etc. So that's really fundamental. And at the end, I'm going to share my LinkedIn profile, where I'm going to write some practical experiences, because of course time is limited in this session, but I want to give you a little bit of a condensed experience. So I will explain what data marketplace in one of my articles. Processes, you need to create the processes that creates that synergy between all the domains. And of course, one important aspect in the data side is there are some decisions that can be done globally on an organizational level, but also there are some decisions that can be done in the local domain. And that balance, you have to balance it yourself between the general regulations that apply for your whole organization and also the amount of flexibility that you want to give to your domain. If you manage to achieve that and found that balance, then it's really good in order from a governance perspective. And the last one is around the people. So you need, in your federated governance, create in the domain itself the culture of, if there's a data quality issue, or if there's a data gap or data exchange, the domain itself will support it, and the data governance tools that support that need to support that at the domain itself. So if you have, let's say, a data profiling tool, most of the current tools, they want to run on a central big data kind of platform, but that's not going to work in the mesh concept. So you need to find the tool that can run still the data profiling, maybe at the domain level, but then gather the metadata and put it centrally in one place, so you can track it from an organization perspective. And of course, also the domain is responsible for how the consumption of the data will happen across domains. So you should have a standard exchange kind of patterns, maybe batch patterns, stream, direct querying, APIs, etc., etc. So we're almost at the end. So I also don't want to just be biased here. So I'm going to give my fair opinion also about the challenges with data mesh, because as I said, it is really challenging and also new and totally modern architecture. So one of the struggles that you will run into it is a little bit of the specialization of people. So data mesh really requires specialists to create this kind of an shareable infra, the concept of I build it, but you use it instead of I build it end to end. And that is one of the challenges. And then, of course, data redundancy can exist with all these duplication around the data in each domain. So you really need to have a very powerful data governance layer in order to be in control of your data. Adoption costs, so data mesh can be costly for organization, but also the benefits can be greater. So you have to scale this up yourself. And of course, the complexity, since it's emerging architecture, and the technologies also are still coping with that. So there will be, at the beginning of it, some complexity in your organization. So in summary, there is, in my opinion, no right or wrong architecture. You should be able to choose the best that fits your organization, and you can mix and match. Why not? So you can take the benefits, one of the benefits from the data warehouse, combine it with the lake benefit, and definitely use one of the mesh concepts to maybe get more data domain ownership, or the other way around. So feel free to, it's not like black and white here, and keep close eye on the emerging technologies, because most of the new technologies are trying to adapt the mesh concepts. And at the end, my advice is it's a journey, right? So during the journey, you can fall, you can get hurt, you can even question yourself, am I doing the right thing or not? You can have some doubts, but you should just never stop trying and keep moving forward. And I think eventually together we will reach to a goal. Maybe the goal will be fully mesh, or maybe mesh in a different implementation, but don't underestimate the data mesh architecture and what it brings to the table. At the end, I was your host today. My name is Mahmoud. This is my LinkedIn profile. So I'm going to post a detailed articles on each of every principle, the theory, and then the implementation. And I hope that I give you a little bit of a condensed session today, but the topic is big. So I hope you enjoyed it. And I will have a look now to the moderator quickly. Yeah, so if you have any question, you can contact me directly. Yeah, thanks a lot for joining in, and thanks.